Usually when we look at a country's economic data, there's this expectation of like absolute precision.
Oh, sure, yeah.
It's treated almost like engineering, right? You look at a balance sheet, the ledger shows you the exact export volume, the GDP growth rate is, cleanly printed right
Yeah,
there.
right.
And the analyst just points to it and basically says, there it is. That is the health of the nation.
Yeah, it's treated as this binary thing. It's just a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
We have this tendency to want things to be highly visible, to be categorized into these neat little fiscal quarters so we can, measure them easily.
Exactly. Like, is it growing or not growing? It's clean.
Yeah.
But then you step into the world of long-term, multidimensional national development, and suddenly that simple ledger it breaks down completely.
It really does. It falls apart.
We're looking at a developmental landscape today that is, quite honestly, incredibly murky if you're only looking at one little piece of the puzzle. You simply cannot understand a country's trajectory just by looking at what they exported last Tuesday.
No, you can't. It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. If you don't have the right long-term data to guide you, you're well, you're basically just guessing.
Right.
You might see like a booming tourism sector and think, oh, the country is thriving, completely missing the fact that their demographic foundation is hollowing out or that their institutions are stagnating.
Which brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are unpacking a massive, dense, and truly revealing analytical report.
Yeah, it is dense.
Oh, incredibly. It's titled the Montenegro Multidimensional Development Analysis Report, and it covers the 1960s all the way through the 2020s.
That's a massive
It
timeline.
really is.
Right.
So to you listening right now, we aren't just looking at one article or some quick summary of current events. We are sitting on a mountain of long-term time series data.
Yeah.
We're talking about records from the World Bank and, standardized social science databases spanning over 40 years. It even pulls from specific data sets like MP3_M&E.
And the methodology here is really the crucial element. We are looking at time series analysis, which means we actually get to see the slow, sort of invisible creep of societal change.
Right, it's not an overnight thing.
Exactly. This
Wow.
isn't just a GDP tracker. We're evaluating gender disparities over generations, international governance rankings, and these massive sectoral shifts in how the people of Montenegro actually spend their working lives. It's a holistic view of an entire nation's life cycle.
Yeah, and just to set the tone for you, the source file we're working from, it isn't some flashy marketing brochure trying to sell you on foreign investment.
No.
It's stark. The cover is literally a crisp white background with this solemn, deep academic gray map outlining the country, and it clearly marks that research cycle from the 60s to the 2020s.
It sets a very serious empirical tone right from the start.
It really does. It makes it clear that we are here to look at the hard evidence, completely independent of any, short-term political cycles.
It strips away all the narrative and forces you to look at the mechanics of the country. And when you look at a generational transformation of that magnitude, you kind of have to start with the fundamental economic engine.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can understand the people or the health or the politics, we have to look at the money.
Always.
How has Montenegro's economy actually survived the sheer volatility of the last few decades?
Well, the data tracking their adjusted net national income tells a really fascinating story about wealth accumulation.
It does. When you track the time series for their per capita income, you see a very distinct, steady baseline of growth. For context, if we look back at 2015, the per capita income was sitting around $5,857.
Right.
And it climbs methodically, hitting a peak in 2021 of over $8,403. The report actually uses this little money bag icon to show that stair-step increase.
But the journey between those two numbers is violent. The data for the year 2020 shows a negative 16.14% growth in a single year.
It's a bungee jump. That's the only way to describe it.
A bungee jump, yeah.
There's this massive red downward arrow in the report for 2020. We all know the global environmental and health shocks that hit the world then, but seeing a 16% drop in national income visually represented, it's jarring.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a sudden engine stall on the highway. You're cruising along, building wealth, and suddenly the engine just dies.
A shock of negative 16% is, well, it's catastrophic for a developing economy. In a lot of historical contexts, a drop like that wipes out a decade of progress.
Right, it sets you back entirely.
It destroys capital, it bankrupts the middle class, and it takes years, sometimes an entire generation, just to claw back to the previous baseline.
But that's exactly what makes the Montenegro data so compelling. Because the very next year, in 2021, the data shows a massive upward rebound.
Positive 15.39%.
Marked with a bright green arrow, the engine didn't just restart, it roared back to life.
And we have to ask why. Why did it bounce back so aggressively? Because a rebound of almost 15.4% tells us something fundamental about the structural integrity of Montenegro's economy.
Meaning it wasn't broken, just paused.
Exactly. It means the underlying economic machinery, the infrastructure, the human capital, the market access, was not destroyed by the 2020 shock. It was merely put on hold. The wealth accumulation trend is fundamentally pointing up. They are building real, durable wealth despite extreme external volatility.
So how are they doing it? Like, where is that wealth actually coming from? Because if you look at how their GDP is broken down by sector on slide 4, the landscape is unrecognizable compared to a few decades ago.
Unrecognizable is the perfect word.
By 2023, the service sector is sitting at an overwhelming 63.7% of the total value added to the GDP. Services are the undisputed heavyweight champion of their economy.
And to understand the magnitude of that 63.7%, you have to look at what they left behind. The historical shift is profound. The agricultural sector, which used to represent a very respectable 11.3% of their economy, has basically collapsed.
Wow.
It has dwindled down to just 3.49%.
Just over 3%. That is a total transformation of the physical and economic landscape.
The report actually circles this specific trend line and explicitly identifies it as deep deindustrialization and a total transition to a service-based economy.
Right.
But let's think about the actual mechanism of that transition. What does it actually mean for a society to move from agriculture and heavy industry to a roughly 64% service economy?
It means a complete rewiring of daily life. I mean, if you're listening to this, think about the timeline of your own family. In an economy like Montenegro's historical baseline, your grandparents likely worked the fields, or they worked in heavy manufacturing.
Exactly.
Their physical bodies were their primary economic tool. Wealth was generated by pulling things out of the ground or assembling them in a factory.
Right, and the value of that labor was linear. You work a field for 10 hours, you get 10 hours of crop yield.
But now, your entire generation is sitting at desks, working in hospitality, managing digital tourism campaigns, or providing financial services. It is a total societal pivot from physical brawn to cognitive capability.
The primary economic tool is no longer the physical body, it's the mind. And that pivot completely changes the vulnerability of the economy.
How so?
Well, when your wealth is tied to a factory, a flood or a supply chain shock can permanently destroy your output. But when your wealth is tied to services like high-end coastal tourism or digital exports, you're vulnerable to different kinds of shocks.
Like global travel restrictions in 2020.
Exactly, which perfectly explains that massive 16% drop, but it also explains the 15% rebound in 2021. You don't have to rebuild a factory to restart a service economy. You just have to open the doors again.
That makes perfect sense. The capital isn't locked in heavy machinery, it's locked in the people.
Yes.
But, and this is a big but, a service economy requires a specific type of workforce. And if we look at the demographic data, Montenegro is facing a ticking clock.
They absolutely are. The demographic data in this report is genuinely ominous.
There's this clear visual tracking the population age structure over time, and you see these two distinct lines. One is the youth population, ages 0 to 14, and the other is the elderly population, 65 and up.
Right.
And right there in the 2010s, those two lines cross.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, in demography, the crossing of those two lines is basically a point of no return. It fundamentally alters the social contract of a nation.
Let's break down the exact numbers for everyone because the trajectory is relentless. The youth population started out in the 1960s at a really robust 36.1%.
Over 1 in 3 people in the country was a child.
Yeah, exactly. But over the decades, that percentage has just withered. The report has this little shrinking ring graphic to show it. It's down to roughly 18% now.
It's been cut in half.
Cut in half. Meanwhile, the elderly population started at just 6.5% back in 1960. Today, as of 2023, that demographic has surged to over 17%.
So we are looking at an irreversible trend toward a deeply aging society. But the critical part isn't just that there are more older people. It's the friction this creates within that 64% service economy we just talked about.
Right, because you build this modern, shiny, dynamic service economy, but you are literally running out of young people to run it.
Exactly. And this brings us to the dependency ratio, which is perhaps the most vital metric for understanding the daily grinding reality of Montenegro's workforce.
It's a pressure cooker.
It is.
Yeah.
The old age dependency ratio, which tracks how many retirees every working age person has to financially support, has spiked. It went from a very manageable 11.3% up to nearly 28%.
Let's visualize that ratio for the listener. It's like a town's water reservoir, right?
Okay.
The water flowing into the reservoir is the tax revenue and economic output generated by the young working age population. The water flowing out of the pipes is the Social Security, the pensions, and the healthcare costs utilized by the elderly population.
That is an excellent way to frame it.
For decades, the pipes drawing water out were small, and the rain refilling the reservoir was heavy. A dependency ratio of 11.3% means there is plenty of surplus.
Right. The system works fine.
But now that ratio has hit nearly 28%. The pipes drawing water out are getting wider and wider every single year, and the rain refilling it has slowed to a drizzle.
And the data reveals the specific mechanics of why this is happening. The total dependency ratio actually hit rock bottom around the year 2010. It was as efficient as it was going to get, but then it started bouncing back up.
Okay, wait. Why did it bounce back?
And here's the crucial insight. It bounced back up solely because the elderly population is growing so rapidly, not because there was a sudden boom in the youth population. It is driven by the combined impact of low birth rates, or Shoziwa, and increasing longevity.
So what does this all mean for the average worker? Are they just carrying a heavier and heavier backpack of Social Security and healthcare costs?
I mean, yes, that backpack analogy is perfectly valid. It means immense invisible pressure. When you have an old age dependency ratio approaching 28%, it means every paycheck drawn by a worker in that service economy has an increasingly large slice taken out of it to fund the state.
Which hurts when you're just trying to get by.
Exactly. You have to fund pensions, you have to fund specialized elder care, and you have to maintain the social safety net. It's a silent pressure cooker. It doesn't make headlines like a 16% GDP drop does, but month by month, year by year, as more people turn 65 and fewer babies are born, the burden on the individual worker becomes significantly heavier.
If you have fewer young people, you better make sure the ones you DU have are incredibly capable.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to their brains, because the data on human capital and education shows some massive paradigm-shifting triumphs.
The baseline human capital metrics here are exceptionally strong. For instance, the adult literacy rate is sitting at an astonishing 98.5%.
98.5.
Yeah, you have a functionally universally literate population, which is the absolute prerequisite for a service-driven economy.
But literacy is just the baseline, right? The data that is truly disruptive is the shift in female higher education.
Right.
If you look at the year 2000, the gross tertiary enrollment for women, meaning women going into higher education, was 19.7%. Basically 1 in 5.
Yeah.
But by 2023, it exploded to 66.9%.
What's fascinating here is that going from 19.7% to 66.9% in just over 2 decades is a complete rewiring of the intellectual fabric of the society. The analytical data actually circles this growth and notes that gender educational opportunities have equalized and actually achieved a reversal.
Women are vastly out-educating men at the university level now.
Yes, they are.
2 out of every 3 women are pursuing higher education. That is incredible. And we can see the direct result of that education when we evaluate the Human Capital Index, or HCI, on slide 8.
The HCI is a really fascinating metric.
I like to explain it to you all listening, like a battery charge for a human being's economic potential. The data states that the overall HCI for Montenegro in 2020 was 0.63.
Right.
What that means in practical terms is that a child born in Montenegro today will, on average, only reach 63% of their ideal maximum productivity potential over their lifetime.
It's a sobering number.
Their battery is only ever going to charge to 63% because of inherent limitations in health and education quality.
And if your population is shrinking, you really cannot afford to have a workforce running at only 63% of its theoretical capacity. You need them operating at 90% or 100% to offset that demographic deficit.
Exactly.
But when we break that 0.63 down by gender, the impact of that explosive female university enrollment becomes very clear. The female human capital index is 0.64, while the male index is sitting slightly lower at 0.62. Health and education are the absolute core variables to maintain future productivity here.
So women have a demonstrably higher economic potential in this society. But wait, here's where it gets really interesting and where the data presents a massive contradiction. We just saw women dominating higher education. We know that services absorb 77.3% of the labor force, while industry is down to roughly 18%.
You're right.
Does all that female education actually translate to the workforce? Like, is the service economy just absolutely dominated by female participation?
Well, you would naturally assume that.
Yeah.
But that is exactly the analytical gap the data exposes. When we look at the labor market reality, the female labor participation rate for those 15 and older has indeed grown. It started in the 20% range and has climbed to 44.1%.
Just 44.1%.
Yeah.
But nearly 67% of women are getting higher education. How is the labor participation rate stuck under 45%? That doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
You have a shrinking workforce, you desperately need highly productive workers, you educate the women, and then they just don't enter the workforce.
It is the greatest point of economic friction in their entire developmental model. There is a massive disconnect here. Imagine investing that heavily in half your population's education, but not fully utilizing them in your service economy. The report even uses these little workplace figures to show the stark contrast in participation.
It's like buying a fleet of incredibly sophisticated, high-performance sports cars, tuning the engines perfectly, and then leaving half of them permanently parked in the garage because you simply never bothered to build the roads for them to drive on.
That is exactly what is happening. And the roads in this context are the societal support structures. We're talking about the mechanics of daily life. Childcare infrastructure, flexible corporate working hours, maternal leave policies, and just deep-seated cultural expectations regarding domestic duties.
Because if a woman has a master's degree in finance, but there is no accessible childcare, or the corporate culture demands rigid 12-hour days in an office.
She remains outside that 44.1% participation rate.
Wow, and the entire economy suffers for it.
Tremendously. When highly educated citizens are sidelined, the government is leaving a massive amount of potential GDP completely unutilized. And remember the demographic time bomb we just talked about?
Yeah.
They are running out of young workers. They cannot afford to leave any human capital parked in the garage.
So how do you fix that? How do you build those metaphorical roads? Because you can't just mandate that companies offer childcare, right?
No, you can't.
Or demand that society changes its cultural norms overnight. It requires policy. It requires administration.
Yes, to fully utilize that talent, a country needs stable rules. Talent flees from corruption and inefficiency. Let's look at how Montenegro is governed, the actual rules of the game.
Right. The data on Montenegro's governance provides a really nuanced look at their institutional capacity. Slide 10 digs into the World Governance Indicators, or WGI.
And this is where we have to be very analytical.
Totally. Let's unpack two of the most critical metrics: control of corruption and rule of law. Based on the percentile rankings, both are hovering right in the middle of the global pack. Control of corruption is floating around the 50th percentile, and rule of law is relatively stable around the 52nd percentile.
Analyzing this impartially, as the metrics require, sitting in the global middle means there is significant room for institutional improvement. A 50th percentile ranking in controlling corruption means you are doing better than half the world, sure, but you're also doing worse than the other half.
Why is that middle position so vulnerable for them specifically? Like, why isn't middle of the pack good enough?
Because of the nature of their economy. If you are an agrarian economy, you rely on the land. But if you are attempting to transition into a high-end digitized service economy, you rely on foreign direct investment, international partnerships, and global trust. Foreign capital demands high levels of legal predictability. If an international hotel chain or a tech company is deciding whether to invest hundreds of millions of euros in Montenegro, a 52nd percentile rule of law score introduces risk. It creates institutional friction.
It's like upgrading the operating system of a computer. The hardware, the economy, only runs as well as the software the government allows it to.
That's a great analogy.
But it isn't a static picture, right? The data on government effectiveness traces a really interesting line graph. Back in 2003, government effectiveness took a massive hit, dropping all the way down to 46.6%.
The system was really struggling.
Yeah. But over the last 2 decades, it has slowly clawed its way up to roughly 59.9% by 2022. Meanwhile, their voice and accountability metrics sits pretty steady at around 53%.
And the most vital insight from the report, the crucial logical link, is that there is a direct positive correlation between that improvement in government effectiveness climbing to almost 60% and the economic rebounds we saw in Section 1.
So smoothing out the software directly translates to GDP growth.
Absolutely. Think of governance as the highway infrastructure for the economy. The government doesn't drive the trucks, but it paves the roads and enforces the speed limits. If effectiveness is low, the roads are full of potholes and traffic grinds to a halt. The friction is just too high.
Speaking of hardware, let's talk about the actual physical health of the people living inside this system.
The public health data is fascinating.
It really is because it shows an incredible triumph, but it also reveals some modern threats. Slide 12 tracks the longevity leap. And the news here is incredible. Male life expectancy jumped from 63.9 years to 71.3 years.
A huge gain.
But the females, they went from 67.1 to an impressive 80.2 years.
That is a demographic triumph, and the analytical data attributes this directly to the systematic expansion of healthcare access. Their universal health coverage, or UHC index, has hit a score of 70.
Which explains the massive increase in overall survival rates.
Exactly. When you reach that level of universal coverage, you see an immediate drop in preventable deaths. Acute traumas, infections, maternal complications, things that routinely end lives in developing systems, are treated early.
But this raises an important question.
It does. The double-edged sword here is that the gender longevity gap is widening significantly. The report highlights this with double arrows on the chart.
Right. A 9-year gap has opened up between men and women. Men are living to 71, but women are living to 80. Why is that gap getting bigger?
It ties back to the economic transition. While everyone benefits from universal health coverage, behavioral factors and occupational hazards disproportionately affect one gender. Historically, men in transitioning economies have higher rates of cardiovascular disease, higher exposure to industrial hazards, and different lifestyle risk profiles.
And a 9-year gap completely warps the demographic reality we talked about earlier. The elderly population is becoming overwhelmingly female.
Yes, which impacts pension design and localized elder care needs. You have a much higher proportion of elderly women living alone in their final years.
So the government successfully extended life, but they are exchanging old risks for new ones.
Precisely.
Slide 13 has these vivid icons, a stethoscope representing medical progress right next to a warning sign representing new threats. Infant mortality has dropped to extremely low levels, which is amazing.
Modern medicine won that battle. But if you look at the warning sign, it points to non-communicable diseases. Specifically, modeled estimates show that overweight rates for children under 5 are remaining stubbornly high.
You can see the exact moment a country shifts from fighting for basic survival to fighting the diseases of modern, sedentary, service-based lifestyles.
Because the environment has become less physically demanding. People aren't working the fields, they're sitting at desks, and simultaneous access to processed foods has increased.
And chronic diseases are a totally different economic burden. If people develop cardiovascular issues early in life and they are living to 71 or 80, the cost to treat those conditions over decades is astronomical.
It pushes the financial cost of that 28% dependency ratio even higher. The workers aren't just paying for pensions, they're paying for decades of chronic disease management.
Right. But there is one piece of infrastructure that appeared almost overnight, attempting to accelerate that service economy faster than the demographic decline can drag it down.
The digital transition.
Yes. Slide 14 covers the digital tipping point, and the data on internet adoption is just a vertical trajectory. Internet usage skyrocketed from a mere 25.3% in 2004 to nearly universal adoption over 80% in recent years.
But consumer internet usage doesn't drive a national economy. You have to focus on the back-end infrastructure.
Right, the secure internet servers.
Exactly. The report tracks secure internet servers per million people. And in 2010, they were practically non-existent, just 20.9 servers per million people.
20?
Yeah. But by 2020, that number exploded to a staggering 6,424.7.
Going from 20 to over 6,400 in a single decade. The visual annotation on the slide actually circles this massive spike and calls it the critical point of digital transformation.
Because this digital readiness directly enables the 63.7% service economy we discussed back in Section 1, you simply cannot export digital services without secure servers.
You can't process global tourism bookings, you can't host startups, it's the new factory.
It is the invisible bedrock of their modern economy.
So what does this all mean when we stack these 15 pages together? Slide 15 gives us the grand summary.
The core narrative here is that Montenegro has pulled off a glorious turn over 40 years. They transition from an agrarian and industrial mix to a highly educated, digitized, and service-driven economy.
But there are two massive storm clouds on the horizon. First, the intense pressure of an aging population on healthcare and dependency ratios. And second, the urgent need to deepen governance reform and control corruption to remain competitive.
Right. Which brings up a final thought, something for you listening to ponder. We've seen that the human capital index is only at 63%. The physical population is aging rapidly, yet the digital infrastructure is exploding. Here's the thought to mull over. In a fully digitized global economy, does the physical aging of a nation's workforce matter as much as it used to? Or will the crushing cost of elderly healthcare bankrupt the state before the digital service economy can actually save it?
That is the ultimate tension, isn't it? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the data around you, look beneath the headlines, and we'll catch you next time.